Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we have made it to the bracket stage of Worlds 2023. The top 8 teams in the world have solidified themselves by making it through the Swiss stage, by qualifying for the quarterfinals, and now we get to the real interesting part, the best of 5 stage here at Worlds, and I couldn't be more excited. This is where heroes are made. This is where all of the best moments in World's history have appeared. The upsets, the close to upsets, the fun moments, the crazy back and forth series. This is the part of the tournament where you can be the most excited and where legends are born. I'm incredibly excited to go over it. In today's video, what we're going to do is we're going to be going through specifically the 4 games in the quarterfinals, the 4 series, talking about who I think might have the advantage in each of them, giving some lane-by-lane analysis for why I think that could happen. Of course, I'll be ranking every player 1 to 8 in terms of the teams left in the quarterfinals, but at the end of the video, I will be doing a full bracket prediction for what I think will happen and who my projected world champion will be in 2023. So if you're excited for that, stick around to the end of the video and also hit the like button. Obviously, if you're enjoying it now, that's really awesome, but if you find yourself enjoying this video in a couple of minutes too, as you know, maybe even at the end, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button, hit subscribe so you can be notified when more of my coverage ends up going live, but I don't want to pander to you guys too much. Let's go ahead and get right into the video. First off, if you don't know me, hi. If this is your first video on the channel, I really appreciate you stopping by. We've been covering not only Worlds all year long. Up until this point, we've covered every single game on this channel, but we've covered every single game of all 4 of the major regions as well. The LCS, the LEC, the LCK, and the LPL. We've covered every single game across the entire year on this channel, and so I'd like to think I have a pretty good idea of where these teams stand. Our predictions going into this tournament have turned out to be incredibly accurate. There weren't a lot of other analysts that were predicting G2 to miss the main stage, even if, you know, they were a top 8 team, and, you know, I think I nailed that one. There weren't a lot of other analysts that would tell you that Weibo had a shot of making it nearly as high, or that if KT was as good of a team. You know, you saw a lot of other top-tier analysts not picking them. So the track record so far has been very accurate, I would say, so stick around. Hopefully I can keep that going with the quarterfinals series, but we get to kick it off by talking about the draw that we got. And quite frankly, the draw that we got for the quarterfinals is basically perfect. I think there is almost no changes in a perfect world that I would even make. The only thing that I would potentially say is swapping the side of the bracket that LNG Weibo and T1 and LNG are on to perhaps get T1 LNG on the top side of the bracket, get LNG Weibo on the bottom side of the bracket. I think that could have been a little bit more interesting in terms of the outcomes, you know, with the narratives that we'll kind of talk about as we go throughout this video. But in terms of draws, in terms of the bracket that we did end up getting, this is essentially the perfect bracket for what we could have hoped for going into this. A lot of really fun first round matchups that do set up for what I see as the 2 best teams at the tournament being on the opposite sides. And so very, very fun stuff, but we're not here to talk about the bracket as a whole just yet. That's going to be for the end. It's time to jump in to the series-by-series preview in the quarterfinals, to the individual matchups that we are going to be seeing, and the first one is the most volatile, for sure. The teams that, you know, kind of snuck their way in here to the quarterfinals, the least convincingly, I would say, over the course of this tournament, neither having had particularly difficult paths, and one certainly being a pretty major upset. We have a matchup between the number 1 seed from the LCS in NRG and the number 4 seed from the LPL in Weibo Gaming. You'll recognize this format if you've watched my channel before, maybe not this year, but in the past. We've done this for playoff videos. We did this for Worlds last year, where we've got everybody up on the screen right now, all 5 members of both teams. I have numbers next to their names. That's personally where I power rank them out of the 8 remaining players individually at the tournament in terms of their position. Now, a lot of that is subject to change because of just how good all these players are to be here in the first place. And of course, they're most played champions over the course of summer plus Worlds. It kind of listed there as well, so you can kind of get a play style idea for what these teams like to go for. Also, kind of new this year is you'll notice there's a little bit of a difference. It's frustrating to show LNG Weibo first, but a little bit of a difference in terms of, you know, how big the color bars are in the middle. Energy's white versus Weibo's black in this case. The black is a little bit longer. That's going to be a little bit of a percentile graph for me. And so you'll notice Weibo's a little bit further forward. That might give a little bit of a hint as to, you know, what I think of Weibo. I think that this is slightly Weibo favored, but as you can see, it's really not gigantically Weibo favored, and we'll kind of go over that as we go through this. But let's go ahead and talk about both of their rosters. Starting with LNG, their lineup is looking like Dokla in the top lane, Contracts in the jungle, Palafox in the mid lane, FBI at AD carry, and Ignar at support. And then for Weibo, you've got the Shy in the top lane, Weiwei in the jungle, Xiaohu in the mid lane, Light at AD carry, and Crisp at support. Two teams that, again, have had pretty easy paths to get here, at least at this tournament so far. I'm not saying that either has not deserved to get here, because if you do get out of Swiss stage, if you do make top 8, you deserve to be here. Weibo beat some good teams in order to get here. They had to beat Fnatic, and that was a really tough series. LNG had to take down G2. You can talk about their other series not being as tough of competition, both of them getting to go through teams like Mad Lions, but both of them did have to beat, Swiss stage caliber teams or main stage caliber teams in order to get here. And so both of them definitely deserve to be here. It's just about what they can do with the opportunities that they've created. I think a lot of people are going to look at Weibo as pretty big favorites in this series because LNG is kind of the Cinderella story of Worlds up until this point. They really should not be here, and it's a big shock that they are here, but it shouldn't be. Like, this team has overperformed all year long. I know I've doubted them. I'm not even the highest on LNG that anybody has been, but we were talking about them going into the Swiss stage and some of the adjustments that they had made, not only in terms of their gameplay, but in terms of their mentality going into this tournament. We've heard interviews from Demonte and other coaches and players like FBI, players like Palafox, players like Contracts that have gone on record and said that, they've studied a lot of tape, they've studied a lot of top players and kind of tried to match mentalities with them, not only in terms of how they view the game, but how they view the game when they're not playing it as well, in terms of what is solo queue like to them, how do they view scrims, and what do they take from scrims. It just feels like they've adopted a really healthy strategy and mental in terms of how to adapt their game towards what they need to, and towards competing in the first place. And I think that's the reason they're here. I think genuinely talent-wise, they are good enough, and they always have been. NA, in my opinion, has always been talented enough to be able to make runs like this, but LNG has kind of unlocked the mental aspect, which has really pushed them over the top. But are they going to be good enough to be able to overcome any team in the quarterfinals? That is definitely a question, because as you can see from my player rankings, it's 8s across the board. It's last place in terms of the quarterfinals across the board in terms of talent. And that's not me trying to disrespect any of the players that are there. We're just in the top 8 at Worlds. It's really hard to be able to keep up with some of the other players. As much as I've said that, talent-wise, they can be here. They've always been able to be here. Getting farther than here is definitely a bigger question mark. Dokla, I think, is going to be a big factor for LNG in this series. The Shy is somebody who is very up and down in terms of how he's able to play the game, the positives, the negatives, the back, the forth. He can be very hit or miss in terms of what he offers Weibo Gaming output-wise, but if Dokla is able to actually win that matchup, which I'm going to be honest is not out of the realm of possibility, especially if you watch Dokla over the course of this year, then I think that this could actually be a lot more interesting than people give them credit for. The Shy has obviously been really good at this tournament. He's been one of the best top laners at Worlds, which is not super surprising. The problem with the Shy has never really been talent. It's always been focus. It's always been mentality. It's always been his ability to lock in. Now, if you're not willing to lock in for the LPL, that's a bigger question mark, but at the very least, he's figuring it out as of now, and he's been really good at this tournament. If he can pick up some of those carry threats and continue to be a positive factor for Weibo, that's going to be a major positive for them, because they really haven't had that impact from the top side all year long, and they're still here. But again, if you're getting a worse version of the Shy, Dokla is not a pushover. I saw a bunch of people ranking him below players like Summit and Chasey coming into the tournament in terms of their top lane power rankings. I just think that's absolutely absurd, and I think anybody who's watched LCS over the course of this year would agree with that. Dokla has grown into a very complete player. Yes, he can play tanks, but you really want him on aggressors, and he's really someone that LNG likes to play through, and so I think that could be an avenue for them. Then you look at the jungle matchup, Contracts versus Weiwei. This is probably the most even matchup across both teams, in my opinion, unless, Dokla and the Shy ends up being super even. Both of them step up, and they're both superstars, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, but Contracts is a player that I do think has the mechanics to go toe-to-toe with a lot of Eastern junglers, which I just don't think you're going to hear a lot of other analysts say. And Weiwei certainly is not some superstar. He's a solid player, and he's certainly somebody that helps this team out a considerable amount. His kind of reintroduction into the LPL, him being put into this Weibo Gaming lineup over Karsa, is what really unlocked them to be a team that ended up making a Worlds run. It's not the only thing. I think obviously Xiaohu is playing really well, and Light and Crisp really exploded during the back half of summer, but Weiwei's introduction to the team certainly has made them better, but he is definitely more of a facilitator, whereas Contracts is a very good facilitator, but is kind of a facilitator in the focal point kind of way, where he's going to play your Sejuani, he's going to play Poppy, he's going to play Ivern, he's going to play these more supportive champions, but he's going to play them with resources, and all of the pressure on the map is going to be focused around him typically. So again, that's another avenue where theoretically I could see NRG being able to generate a lead, but Weiwei is very consistent, and Weiwei does really well into junglers that he is just more talented than. I could see that being a problem for NRG, specifically because Contracts in the past has been known to be a bit feast or famine. When he loses, he does lose relatively hard. And then the mid lane matchup, the one that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about. I think it's certainly one of the more intriguing ones because of Xiaohu's comments before the tournament where he called Palafox a genius. I think it's well-deserved. I think we've seen it over the course of this tournament that Palafox has really been able to step up to the world stage and prove that he belongs here and show that he's one of the best mid laners that North America has to offer. Now, is he going to be able to kind of rectify what happened when these two teams played last time, which is worth noting. This is not the first time these two teams have played at this tournament. They played in the first round of this tournament, and Weibo absolutely blasted NRG, mostly off the back of Xiaohu just destroying Palafox. Is he going to be able to turn that around? Is Palafox going to be able to have a different kind of game? I think it's certainly possible. We heard a lot about the nerves that he was feeling going into that first ever Worlds game, his first ever international game, let alone Worlds. And, for him to perform as well as he did outside of that, when he destroyed Team Liquid, he was really good into caps in that series against G2. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that Palafox now has some legs under him in terms of confidence, and that this matchup against Xiaohu, who, again, has been kind of struggling at this tournament, is definitely one that, given the right matchup, could go NRG favored, but it's just really hard to bet against Xiaohu, who has been more consistent. If you want to believe the narrative that Xiaohu's kind of a choker at Worlds, I guess it's possible to buy into that, but I would still say that that's a pretty Weibo favored lane, in my opinion. And then for bot lane, you've got FBI and Ignar taking on Light and Crisp. I think FBI versus Light is a very fun matchup to kind of talk about because FBI is a player that's just been slept on for his entire career, whether it's been on Golden Guardians, whether it's been on 100 Thieves, whether it was on Evil Geniuses in Spring or now here on NRG. He's just been good everywhere he has been. He's been an impact player that has been able to win on that side of the map, especially isolated in the 2v2 for a long time now. He has become a bit more of a team fighter as his career has gone on. That's kind of the opposite of what he was known for when he first broke out in North America, where he was this lane-dominant ADC that really struggled at being able to transition leads into the late game. But now he's become a lot more consistent in the back half of the game, and some of those early game aggressive tendencies have kind of gone away, which can be concerning because you're going against Light and Crisp, who are a very aggressive bot lane. Light is awesome. He might not be the most flashy, he might not be the most aggressive, but he is certainly one of the most consistent in the entire world, and that's something that he's just not going to get the credit for. I've been calling Light a premier AD carry at a global level for quite a long time. It is worth noting, he has not had a great tournament, and we'll talk about Crisp in a second. Crisp has also not had a great tournament, but they should be favored in this bot lane matchup. Crisp was my number 3 support in the world going into this tournament. He's dropped down to number 6, at least in terms of the teams that are left, because his performances at Worlds have really not been that good, and other supports have played really well. Players like Delight and Keria have definitely jumped him in terms of my rankings, but the Crisp that was there in the LPL summer split can absolutely still emerge. We started to see more glimpses of that as we got further along into the Swiss stage. He was struggling a lot in the first couple days. He really righted the ship and got back on board as we went further along. I have a feeling that this is going to be fine for Weibo Gaming, that Light and Crisp are going to be good enough. But remember, the last time these two played, FBI and Ignar were not the problem for this team. Ignar in particular actually made some pretty interesting plays in that game. And so when you're looking at this, yes, Weibo is favorited, and yes, I would still pick Weibo if I was picking somebody in this series, but it's certainly not a blowout, and I think a lot of people are going to treat it as such. NRG is thanking the gods for the draw that they ended up getting. These are probably the 2 worst teams in the quarterfinals, and they play against each other. There really aren't a lot of matchups that NRG, I think, could have won. This is absolutely one of them. I think Weibo is definitely still going to be favorites, but this should be a really fun series and a blast to kick off the quarterfinals. And then moving on to our second series of the quarterfinals, and this one a little bit more interesting in terms of the talent in the teams involved. Both of these teams, I think, don't just want to win this series, they want to get far in this tournament. These are 2 teams that maybe expect to even make the finals at Worlds here. It's a matchup between the number 1 seed from the LCK in Gen.G and the number 2 seed from the LPL in Bilibili Gaming. Very, very wild matchup to see this in round number 1. This was a very probable semi-finals matchup between these 2 teams because I think both of them, at the very least, see themselves as top 4 teams in the world. But now they're going to have to go head-to-head, and one of them will be out in the quarterfinals. Certainly not, I think, what I expected and what a lot of other people expected. But let's go ahead and go over what their rosters are looking like, what they look like position by position, and maybe talk about why I think there is some, faith and thought in both sides of this matchup potentially going over. Gen.G's lineup is looking like Doran in the top lane, Peanut in the jungle, Chovy in the mid lane, Pays at AD carry, and Delight at support. And BLG is looking like Bin in the top lane, Jun in the jungle, Yagao in the mid lane, Elk at AD carry, and On at support. Very intriguing lineup. Some world-class talent in this matchup. In my opinion, there is a real argument to be made that there are two top 5 players in the world in this series, in Chovy and in Bin, who I think have both been performing at a ridiculously high level. Chovy's going to get a lot of flack. Bin is going to get a lot of praise for how he's been playing at Worlds, but I'll go into why I think both of them are still relatively equal in terms of talent level across this tournament. I guess we'll get to Bin first because, of course, we start in the top lane with these matchups. Bin taking on Doran. I have Doran a little bit conservatively at number 4. A player in Zeus ends up passing him and going up in these rankings. Doran did start at number 4, but things have kind of switched around and moved around a bit as this tournament has kind of flip-flopped, and I've taken current form, I would say, into relative account a little bit more than maybe I would have in other circumstances, but Bin is the best top laner in the world. This is a Bilibili favored matchup, even if I really like Doran, and even if I'm very much on the Doran train. I've been hyping him up all year long. I've been talking about how this is the single best year of his entire career, and that includes all the Griffin stuff. That includes anything that's happened after Griffin. Just, it's Doran. Like, he is finally emerged as a carry top laner because he started getting resources from Gen.G to actually be that guy. But you want a carry top laner, you want someone that's going to be able to dominate the game, and you want to be able to have someone on that side of the map that you can put resources into and have them give it back to you 10 times over. There's just no one better in the world right now than Bin, who has proven over and over and over again that he is the guy. Not only did he do it in the playoffs in the spring split when he pretty unexpectedly got this BLG team into finals in the LPL, not only did he do it at MSI when he was one of the single best players at the entire tournament and absolutely wrecked a bunch of really good teams, including this Gen.G team on his way to an MSI finals. Not only was he easily the best top laner in the LPL this split and a very near MVP winner in the LPL, but he was also really good in the first couple games at Worlds. He's been the best player for this team at this tournament. It's absurd just how consistent Bin has been over the course of this year, and I just don't see any reason to ever believe that that's not going to continue to be the case. Bin is a superstar for Bilibili, and I would expect him to be that way. Again, he's going to be the favorite in this matchup, and that's definitely going to be a BLG favored topside, no matter basically what happens. But then we get into the rest of the roster, starting with jungle. Peanut versus Jun is a very interesting matchup because Jun has had really good moments over the course of this year. For somebody who this is really his first big showing, his first big experience on a major team in the LPL in Bilibili, having come off basically a career with Invictus up until this point where that team has just never been competitive, finally getting a shot after performing incredibly well on IG over the past few years with a good roster around him. He has more than lived up to the billing. He has been everything that this team signed him for and more. He's been mostly a facilitator, but he can carry games in terms of the damage that he puts out too. I know a lot of people look at the Nidalee as kind of a signature pick. It obviously didn't quite work in the Swiss stage, but Jun is a really good player, and I think that he has enough in his arsenal and his toolkit to be a top-tier jungler, but Peanut's just on another level, in my opinion. There is a group of 2 junglers in the world that I just think are the top 2 junglers in the world. It's Kanavi and it's Peanut, and I think both of them obviously deserve their flowers for very different reasons, but Peanut is the best facilitative, is the best supportive, enabling, whatever you want to call it, jungler in the world. There is no one who I would trust to get my laners ahead more consistently than Peanut. The only thing that he has done over the course of the last 2 years, ever since he signed with this organization, is at the very worst be a top 2 jungler in the world. Every game he's able to go out there and make a difference. Yes, sometimes he's going to be a little bit more up and down. There are going to be some plays that look a little bit more questionable coming out from Peanut. I know a lot of people look at those plays and like to make grandiose and big statements about his game as a player because of them, but his good moments are better than anybody else's good moments, barring Kanavi, in the world, and that includes Jun, which is why I would say that that's a Gen.G favored matchup. But again, Peanut can have some up and downs, and he's not always going to be the biggest game changer in the entire universe. Jun is a good enough jungler to be able to hang with Peanut. It's just going to be about, can he do that for 5 straight games, which is a big ask. And then in the mid lane, you got Chovy versus Yagao. This is a matchup we've obviously seen before. These two have made Worlds a lot. These two have made the Worlds bracket stage a lot. 2 very experienced and qualified players. Chovy's just been better this year. I like Yagao quite a bit, but I actually think there's a real strong argument to be made that Yagao's had a worse year in 2023 than he did in 2022, where I really thought he completely broke out for JDG, and he did last year, and he's still been really good. He's still been that more facilitative style of mid laner. You know, you see a lot of the Annie, you see a lot of the Nico. These are more engagers, and that's a weird thing to say coming out of the mid lane position, but that was the meta for a long time, was these more like flankers, these, you know, ultimate initiators, if you will, coming out of there. And Yagao definitely likes that style. He likes to be able to be the one that puts his team forward. He likes to be the ones who actively go out and be the playmaker for Bilibili, and he has been that, but Chovy is just better. Like, as much as I like Yagao, I think Yagao's been a little bit overrated over the course of the last few months in terms of the output that he's put out, and I'm the one that was defending him, not only life and death last year on JDG when I called him a top 10 player in the world, because I truly do believe that in 2022, he was a top 10 player in the world, but in spring, when this team wasn't working out in the regular season at the beginning, when him and June had no chemistry, I was the one defending Yagao when every single Reddit analyst was like, he's washed, he's never going to be good again. And that's why it pains me to say that it's just not been there for me in the summer split. The things that he showed a lot of in spring, they're still there in flashes, but it's just not as consistent as it was in previous years, which is why I just have a lot of faith in Chovy, who, yes, I know people are getting bored of putting Chovy at the top of their tier list, and so you can see him starting to fall down in some of the rankings. You can see people putting him 3rd or 4th or 5th in terms of mid laners in the quarterfinals, because I really do think it's just voter fatigue, right? People are just tired of putting him at number 1, but his play has not changed at all. In fact, it's only gotten better in 2023. The main criticism that's always been lobbied at Chovy is that he's a selfish player, that he likes resources too much, and I hate to tell you, but it's just not been on the tape in 2023. There's been a couple of games where clearly Gen.G's getting blasted by 10k gold, and, you know, he's just like, I'm the only one with even a remote chance to be able to save this game. I need to get as fed as possible so I can 1v9, and that's kind of always been the root of the problem for him. But when Gen.G's winning, Chovy's the biggest team player in the entire world. He's the best roaming mid laner I can possibly think of, and that shows. Go watch the tape. I promise it's there. I know it's not necessarily the reputation that you're going to hear from him when it comes to Reddit or Twitter or some other analysts, but as somebody who's covered the LCK all year, Chovy is the better mid laner of these two, even at the things that they do overlap on. I pretty favorably put this in Gen.G's corner. And then you've got Pays and Delight taking on Elk and On in the bot lane. This is the most interesting matchup for me between these two teams, because I think this is really where things are going to be make or break for both of these teams. Elk has been such a major part of what Bilibili wants to do for this, you know, tournament, especially when he gets ahead, when he wins, this team wins games. It's end of story, it's not close, but Elk can be pretty susceptible to over-engaging and to putting too much into some plays, and if there was ever an AD carry that's going to be able to punish that, it's Pays, who I think had just about as perfect of a rookie year as you could possibly ask for. Not only is he here in the quarterfinals as the #1 seed from the LCK in his home country of Korea, but like, he was the MVP for me in the summer split. He has completely been a game-breaking type of presence in the bot lane. Delight has obviously helped with that. His Rakan is unstoppable, and he seems to be the only one not afflicted by the Alistar curse at this tournament, where he has played that champion at a crazy high level, but it's really hard to say which of these bot lanes is going to be more consistent, because Elk, in my opinion, has been more obviously good at this tournament. He's been given more options, he's been given more resources to be able to win games for his team, but Pays was better over the course of 2023. I truly do believe that. When you look at their tape in the regular season and in the playoffs of their domestic leagues, I would have taken Pays. So I essentially think AD carries a wash. And I think On versus Delight is super close. I think Delight has played out of his mind at this tournament so far. It's been the best tape of his entire career, in my opinion. And I know it's a small sample size. Worlds hasn't exactly been the most amount of games, and especially for Gen.G, who really just played their first 4 and then got out of there. Like, they didn't have to do too much in order to qualify here for the quarterfinals, but in all 4 of those games, Delight was a complete game-breaking type of impact. And as much as I like On, Delight has been better than him at this tournament. On is a big playmaker. He's somebody who likes to play these engagers, and especially hook champions, think things like the Nautilus and especially the Blitzcrank, to try and create havoc on the map. He's a very aggressive support, which kind of matches Elk, of course, but Delight's the kind of player that I think could shut that down if everything goes right, especially if he's playing at that level that he was playing at in the Swiss stage. And so when you look at this, yes, Bilibili is incredibly talented. Yes, I do think their team is really good, and there are avenues for them to win this. I think Bin is a really good player, and Elk Elk can win any game, period, end of story. I think that's a push. And On really is a world-class support. He's going to be somebody that will make an impact, but Bilibili has also kind of been on a downward trajectory in recent months, especially by the end of the LPL playoffs, and Gen.G has done nothing but dominate everybody that they've gone up against, even other good teams at this tournament. They got out in 4 games, remember. This was not a tough road for them. I think that's going to continue. I think Gen.G is favored in this, although as you can see, it's much more of a like 65 to 35 than it is like a 90-10 or anything like that. This is definitely still a series that Bilibili could win, specifically because they were able to take it the last time these two played at MSI, but I think this is a better version of Gen.G. I think they've only grown, specifically this bot lane has gotten better, and I don't think Bilibili is as good as they were at MSI, and so for me, I'm going to take Gen.G and maybe what is a little bit against the grain in terms of just how much I favor them here. And then moving on to our third series, and this is the one that I see as, unfortunately, maybe the most lopsided, the most easily predictable in my opinion, but that's only because one of these teams is really good, not because the other team is bad by any stretch. It's a matchup between the number 1 seed from the LPL in JD Gaming and the number 3 seed from the LCK in KT Rolster. What a brutal draw for KT. You have to just feel completely shafted if you're KT with how this tournament has gone for you up until this point. Not only have you played incredibly well, a lot of your players are playing at a very high level at this tournament, but you've only had to play top tier teams. You've legit only played some of the best teams in the entire world. Not a single Western opponent so far at the tournament, and there's a very high likelihood that that is going to be the case because their opponent in the quarterfinals is what a lot of people consider to be the best team in the world right now in JD Gaming. The winners of the LPL, not only in spring but in summer, the winners of MSI, and the team that pretty easily coasted to this quarterfinals appearance. It's just, it's easy to predict Gen.G to do really well in a tournament like this. And unfortunately, as you can see from the percentile graph, I'm not really going against the grain with that one. Gen.G is as good as advertised, and unfortunately for KT, that's not ideal, but there are some avenues that I actually think KT is more than likely to be able to keep up in terms of how their current team has been able to perform, so let's go ahead and talk about them. Let's start in the top lane as per usual. 369 taking on Keen. At the beginning of this tournament, before these games started, I would have told you that this is actually, maybe shockingly, a Keen favored matchup. You would have not really seen that take anywhere else on the internet, and unfortunately, that probably was a mistake for me, and not because I think Keen didn't deserve that kind of ranking going into this tournament, because he was dominant, he was amazing in the LCK. Even in the playoffs when this team was struggling, he was still playing really well, but he just has not been that guy at Worlds. It's just not, it's not his meta. I don't know if he's not just in form. I don't know what it is. It's just not working out for him right now. It's not been a very good tournament. And on the flip side of that, 369 has been everything that he was advertised to be, and then some. He's been able to carry some games for Gen.G here at Worlds, and he still has been the best weak side top laner in the entire world, which is incredibly valuable. And so I think a lot of people will look at this matchup as 369 favored, but I want to make it abundantly clear. If Keen plays the way that he did in the LCK, if he can have one series where he can start to get some of his mojo back, some of that stuff that he had in the middle of the year, then there is nothing stopping Keen from just absolutely destroying 369. As much as I like 369, Keen is a different breed. He's one of those game-breaking kinds of top laners where if you get him rolling, he can genuinely start to take over. Not only has he been able to do that for KT, he's done it for his entire career on Afrika, and so I don't really see a reason that if Keen's not playing at a high level, this can be a KT-favored lane, but it's just, we've seen nothing at Worlds so far to indicate that that is going to be the case. I'm going to go with 369 and Gen.G on this one. And then you've got the jungle matchup. I talked about Peanut and Kanavi being the two S+ tier junglers going into this tournament, and that has not changed at all. As much as I like Cuz, and as much as I do think he's probably the best of the rest in terms of the junglers that are left in the quarterfinals, Kanavi is the best jungler in the world right now. Talked about it a lot over the course of this year, but this might be one of the more impressive years of Kanavi's career. It's right up there with 2020, in my opinion. If you want to take 2020, if you want to take 2023, I'm okay with either of those. Both of them were completely game-breaking years for Kanavi as a player, and the lucky thing for Gen.G is they were both in very similar ways, and I think they're both in very repeatable ways. What Kanavi does better than other junglers in the world is pathing and early macro control, and that's just something that is really, really important in the current meta. There aren't a lot of teams that are going to be able to match that in, game by game by game by game. There aren't a lot of junglers that are just going to win the early game every game, and Kanavi's probably the only one in the world to be able to do that. It's been super consistent. Now, he's had a couple of games where it's looked a little bit more questionable here at Worlds. It's not been exactly perfect, perfect. Their one loss at this tournament so far to LNG was because Kanavi kind of lost a lot of pressure in the early game. There were a lot of other problems in that game as well, but it's worth noting that he's not completely unflappable. Like, he is beatable in a way, but it's just not very often that he gets beaten, and when he wins harder than anybody else in the world. He's one of the most commanding presences to go against, because when you're playing against Kanavi from ahead, he will choke out every resource that you have at your disposal until your team just loses. It's why Gen.G wins faster than anybody else in the world on average. It's because of Kanavi. And then on the other side, you do have Cuz. I like Cuz a lot, and man, when he gets his champions, when he gets Viego in particular, he looks like a completely different beast. You can see that from the win-loss record, but, you know, we've been talking about it all year long. It's not really a surprise that that has kind of been the case. Cuz is a phenomenal player for KT Rolster. It's unfortunate. This is one of the few matchups in the world where I would say that Cuz is probably a little bit outmatched. I like Cuz a lot. He's really grown into being one of the more consistent junglers. It's just Kanavi, man. Like, it's an unfair matchup, and it's Gen.G favored. And then you've got Knight taking on BDD. Knight's the best mid laner in the world. And for me, he's the best player in the world. Now, I will say there was that poll on LNG Esports YouTube account that I'm sure a lot of you ended up seeing because you're fans like I am, that was like, who's been the best mid laner at this tournament? And Knight won. Not sure I'm quite on that train. Scout has been phenomenal for LNG, which we will talk about in the final series next, but Knight I would still take over Scout in terms of projecting the future. That's just kind of been what I think of Knight. I think I would trust him more than almost any other player, if any other player in the world. I really do think that he does everything at a high level. You need somebody who can dominate lane and go up 50 CS and just create pressure in the 1v1 and potentially get a solo kill. It's Knight. You need somebody who's going to roam around the map and be a facilitator that plays with this jungler. It's Knight. You need somebody who can play really safe in the early game and play teamfight-oriented threats, whether that be as a carry or as an initiator. It's Knight. He just does everything at the highest level. It's the reason I called him the #1 player in the world, both last year and this year going into Worlds. I really do believe in him a lot as a player. Well, I think BDD is good. He's really not been game-breaking at this tournament, and generally speaking, BDD has just been kind of fine going up against other great mid laners, where BDD made a lot of his noise, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but where BDD made a lot of his noise, especially in summer, was against the weaker mid laners in the LCK. Now, can that be rectified? Yes, he was better than that in spring, when he was like really clicking, when this KT team was really starting to establish themselves, and when BDD was a genuine MVP candidate in spring. That was when he was really like rolling and playing at a super high level, but I honestly think he's not playing at that level anymore, and that is concerning to me because he's going into Knight. And so, again, another matchup that I would say is Gen.G favored. And then you've got Ruler taking on Aiming, and I would say more specifically Ruler and Missing taking on Aiming and Lehens. Now, this is certainly a more interesting matchup, in my opinion, because this is the one part where you could say that KT does stand a little bit of a chance, and I would not have said that at the beginning of this tournament, as much as I like Lehens. I had him as the #1 support going into the tournament. That has only been justified over the course of this tournament up until this point, and quite frankly, I was too low on Aiming, who has been sensational across this tournament. I know people are always going to look for reasons to doubt KT Rolster, and I've seen a lot of hate for Aiming online, but I think there's an argument to be made that he's been the best AD carry at this tournament. I'm not going to make that argument because I think Ruler and Pays and, Elk have been phenomenal for their teams, but Aiming is right up there with them in terms of what he has been able to output for KT in some really important matches and some really important series, and so don't sleep on him. If you give him resources, he's going to be able to pay them back out. Now, is he somebody who's going to be able to generate those resources himself as consistently as his opponent Ruler will on the other side of the map? Probably not, which is really where Ruler starts to take the advantage and why, Aiming comes in at #5 and Ruler comes in at #1, but there's just too many AD carries in the meta right now for me to say that Aiming is not, like, elite. He's been playing like an elite level. And then you look at Missing versus Lehens, and Lehens is one of the few supports in the world that I genuinely think is better than Missing. And I don't think it's by a lot. I think Missing does a better job of being able to, work with his team and not be, like, the main focal point. He's one of the better supports at being able to lie into the background and then make a big play in terms of team fighting or skirmishes or something like that, because he's a really good laner. And Lehens is a good laner, like, obviously, but you don't get to this point if you're not a good laner, but he's mostly a playmaker. He's somebody who you want to get out of the map, and you want him to be kind of the more advanced player on the map. You want Aiming to be the more pacifist player in that lane, where for Gen.G, it's the opposite. Ruler is definitely going to be the one that is stepping up, and Missing's going to be kind of the safety net for you, and so it's definitely interesting, but if there ever is a lane that I think KT could win, bot lane I think isn't completely out of the realm of possibility, if only because I could see both teams things, not investing in it, and aiming being super good in the late game, which I think is very much a possibility. Now, I do think top lane could also go in favor of KT, but everything else I just think is so in favor of Gen.G that they really are heavy favorites. Like I said, this is, in my opinion, the most lopsided of the quarterfinal series. This is the biggest percentile graph that you're going to see. I have Gen.G at like an 80-20 in this one. Is there a world in which KT ends up taking it? And I might even increase that to like 85-15. It really is like, I would be stunned if Gen.G went out in the quarterfinals. That's all I'll say. They're the best team in the world until proven otherwise. And as much as I like KT Rolster and as happy as I am to see them prove a bunch of people wrong and prove that they are one of the best teams in the world, their horrible luck does continue here because they drew what was the best team in the world, and it will probably be their last series at Worlds. And that brings us to our fourth and final quarterfinal series to cover here in today's video before the bracket preview. And this is the best one, in my opinion, the closest one and the one I'm most excited about. It's a matchup between the number 3 seed from the LPL in LNG Esports and the number 2 seed from the LCK in T1. Talk about a stacked quarterfinals matchup. These are two teams that, I talked about Bilibili and Gen.G both being teams that want to go to the finals, but BLG hasn't quite been that same kind of powerhouse, in my opinion, in the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of months, quite frankly. And these two teams are both on that level. Maybe neither of them is Gen.G, although LNG is probably really close, but like both of these teams could, in theory, win Worlds, and they're playing off against each other in quarters, which is insane. It's certainly a fun matchup, but let's go ahead and go over it. LNG's lineup is looking like Zika in the top lane, Tarzan in the jungle, Scout in the mid lane, Gala at AD carry, and Hong at support. And then T1's lineup is looking like Zeus in the top lane, Owner in the jungle, Faker in the mid lane, Gumayushi at AD carry, and Keria at support. Of course, a couple of these players are probably very familiar with playing against each other. You look at Gala and Gumayushi having played against each other in the quarters last year with RNG versus T1, and then, of course, former scrim partners, Scout and Faker, going up against each other. Scout, of course, being a product of the SKT system before going to the LPL to get an opportunity, and Faker being the franchise player for T1, for SKT, for League of Legends in general. And so, a lot of fun storylines to end up tackling here, but as per usual, we're going to start in the top lane with Zika versus Zeus, and this is probably the most lopsided that this matchup gets, and it's in favor of T1, which I don't think a lot of people are, maybe anticipating for this series. Zeus is just a better top laner than Zika, as much as I like Zika and the development that he's made over the course of this year, coming off of, some good progress from Invictus, I will say, at the beginning of his career, definitely showing some positive stages. Getting onto a good team, very similar to his teammate in June that we already talked about for BLG, getting an opportunity for LNG here. He's a good player. He's a solid top laner. But Zeus has been that guy for the past 2 months. I mean, genuinely, when you look at the LCK playoffs and then the games that they've played at Worlds so far, Zeus has an argument for being right up there with Bin as the best top laner in the world. He has been that good over his recent performances. And if he's going to be able to keep that up in a series like this, then that's going to be a problem for LNG, because they just don't have a superstar on the top side. We talk about the big three with LNG all the time. We talk about Tarzan, Scout, and Gala, and how they really are like this superstar trio, and Hong is certainly a player that has been an all-pro caliber support in the LPL in the past, but Zika has always been the player that needs to step up, that needs to prove that he can belong at this level. He's done very well up until this point, but Zeus is a bit of a different challenge. If T1 is going to generate a lot of consistent leads in this series, I would expect it to be through the top lane here, and this is very T1 favored in my eyes. And then you've got the jungle matchup, Tarzan versus Owner. Two junglers that I think have certainly faced their fair share of problems over the course of 2023. Neither has really had a perfect year, if you will. I think the problems for both have been pretty well documented by fans. Tarzan has received a ridiculous amount of hate, both online and in person, for some of the play that he has put out over the course of this year. Some of it deserved, some of it very much not deserved. I've talked about that on this channel, even as recently as their final series in the Swiss stage. And then for Owner, he has struggled a lot more. In my opinion, his concerns and his worries are a lot more real and tangible. However, he's been good at Worlds, and that's definitely something to take into account. I have Tarzan ranked just a little bit higher at number 5 here. I think Tarzan's been better than people have given him credit for in 2023. He's kind of been the scapegoat for this LNG team because LPL fans like to blame junglers. Like, genuinely, I know that he's had some bad games, but it's just an LPL thing. They like scapegoats. It's one of the popular things, especially with the local region. Like, they like to find players that they can throw under the bus, and Tarzan's kind of been that for LNG, especially because this super team, when they acquired Gala and Summer, didn't start off at an incredibly high level, but ever since they have started to generate some synergy and gel together a bit more, Tarzan's been phenomenal. He was awesome in the playoffs for this team, the LPL playoffs, and he's been good at Worlds. He's had a couple of bad games here and there, but I'll take a bad game in a best of 3 and then 2 really good games pretty much any day of the week. He was phenomenal in the game that qualified them for the quarterfinals. He was easily the best player in that game, and so I like Tarzan. Oner's got that kind of upside too, though, and honestly, Oner's maybe been better than Tarzan at Worlds, certainly a little bit more consistent, but also Oner was way worse domestically than Tarzan was. Tarzan was actually really good in the LPL playoffs, and Oner is one of the big reasons that T1 was never really able to get over the hump. When Faker went out of the lineup, he really struggled. He was a bottom 3 jungler, and then even when Faker came back in and it felt like Zeus and Keria and a lot of these other players that were struggling really started to find their footing again, Oner did not. He continued to struggle at a really high level, even in the playoffs, and so that was a concern, but it's been pretty good at this tournament, especially against players that he should be able to beat relatively consistently. If he's going to be able to do that and control the early game and kind of dominate in the way that he did, you know, against Cloud9, against Tarzan, then I think it's going to be fine for T1, but you know, I really don't know if that's something that's going to be entirely predictable. I think if you're going off of this year alone, Tarzan should have a slight edge here, but I think this is a lot closer to a 50-50 in terms of the jungle position than anything else. And then the matchup everybody is here for, Scout versus Faker. I mean, this is an all-star matchup. Scout is a top 5 player in the world at the current moment. He is the best performing player in the world. I talked about Knight being my number 1 player before, and, you know, Scout comes in at number 3 because I just give the longevity of Knight and Chovy a lot of credence in terms of my rankings, but in terms of the performances that they have put out over the course of this year, Scout is number 1. He genuinely has been the single best player in the world in terms of what he's been doing, and even at Worlds, he's been untouchable at this tournament. He's maybe struggled a bit in 1 or 2 games, but you want to talk about for the majority of this tournament, he has still been lights out in the mid lane. If Scout's playing at a high level, if he's playing like he has all year long, especially with the facilitation of players like Tarzan and Hong coming mid lane and making sure that he's in a really good spot, I mean, LNG is going to win this series super easily, and a big reason why you can see it's slightly LNG favored in my eyes is because of how good I think Scout is and how much I value him. But Faker is certainly not somebody who's going to give that kind of pressure over for free. On the other side, Faker is incredibly talented. We know how good he can be. He's Faker, and he had a resurgent kind of year. Obviously, his perception has kind of risen again because of what happened when he was removed from the lineup for T1, but he's just been a dominant player when he's in the lineup, too. He was the runner-up for MVP for me in the spring split, and he was certainly in the conversation for being T1's best player in summer when he was in their lineup. He was super important for their playoff run. Faker versus Scout is probably the 2 most important players on both teams, and that matchup is really going to determine who ends up winning this. Scout has performed better, even if Faker has been awesome in 2023, and if Scout can have that impact, I'm going to make this LNG favored. And then for Gala versus Gumayusi, oh man, I just love these 2 players. I actually think they're so similar. I know I have Gala ranked significantly higher, but that's only because he's been everything this team has asked for and then some over the course of this year, and Guma has had his concerns. I would say he's maybe been a little bit more inconsistent even at this tournament. Him coming in at number 6 feels incredibly disrespectful because I don't view him any differently than I did at the beginning of this tournament. I just wanted to give Aiming some credit on KT Rolster for being as good as he has been at Worlds so far, so Guma dropped 1 spot, but truly, like, he's still that transcendent, really strong level 80 carry. He might not be a top 10 player in the world, but he's somebody who you can give resources to, and I can trust that if he is ahead, he's good enough to close out any game, and I really do believe that Guma offers that. The problem is that Gala, I think, is just a little bit better than Guma at what he does. Like I said earlier, they're very similar players. Both of them aren't exactly big risk takers in the early game, but both do like to establish pressure, and they do like to team fight really consistently in the back half of games. They're both given very similar resources from their teams. I actually always called Guma like young Gala when he was coming up, and I think that this has always been a fun matchup, but, you know, unfortunately, I don't think the student has overtaken the master just yet. I think Gala is just the better player right now in terms of how he ends up playing out a lot of these games. I think what he has shown not only at Worlds but in the playoffs as well has been amazing. Like, he is a top 2, top 3 AD carry in the world right now. He is honestly playing some of the best League he has in his entire career, and I think he has the real potential to carry this team alongside Scout to a World Finals or a World Championship, and so very lightly I'm going to give it to Gala. I do think I'm going to give the support position to T1, though. I like Hong. I think he's a good player, but he is, I don't want to say mid for the quarterfinals, because that's not really what I mean. He's just not like a superstar, right? Everybody that we're talking about in this game outside of this is a superstar, maybe except for Zika, right? You're looking at a bunch of really, really strong players at all of these positions, players that can take over any game, can be finals MVP in the world finals, etc., etc. I just don't know if Hong is that guy. He's good. I just don't know if he's great. Keria can be great, but Keria has also been inconsistent over the course of this year. He's been solid at this tournament, as has T1 in general, but I think this is going to be more T1 favored in terms of the support positions, but if you can note, that's just top and support for me, and I already don't trust Keria all that much more than I trust Hong, especially because I think bot lane is in favor of LNG when you put the two together, and so for me, LNG is favored in this series, but it's just hard to count out T1. They have always been more than the sum of their parts, not only this year, but in previous years as well, and it's the reason I put T1 at number 3 in my power rankings coming into the tournament. I had LNG at number 4. T1 was higher than them before the tournament. I've changed my mind on that a little bit. I actually just flipped them. I still have BLG at 5, but now I have LNG at 3 and I have T1 at 4. And it's really unfortunate that one of these two teams that I consider to be top 4 in the world is going to go out here. And I really do think this is closer to a 50-50 than any other series, which is why, as you can note, this is the closest bar, maybe barring Weibo and Energy. I think it's, relatively similar, but I think this is closer. But that being said, if I had to predict, I'm going to predict LNG, and I think a lot of that is because I just trust Scout and Gala so much, but it's just hard to vote against Faker. This is going to be a really fun series to watch, and I can't wait to see who comes out on top. Alright, but that is going to do it for my quarterfinals overview and analysis, my predictions, my preview, my everything that you could possibly get for those 4 series up on the screen. You've got the full bracket in front of you. It is time for my full bracket prediction here at Worlds 2023. I'm going to be predicting the winners of the quarters, my semis, and my finals winner here, and I'll be giving some reasons as to why, but again, I'm not going to go into super deep detail because I just covered all 8 of these teams in very deep detail in their quarterfinals series, and so I will quickly be touching upon it in this, but go ahead and watch the rest of this, obviously, if you haven't already, to see what exactly I feel about a lot of these teams. Starting off at the top of the bracket with Gen.G taking on Bilibili Gaming again. Already talked about all these quarterfinal series. I have Gen.G going over in this one. I think they're the better team of these two. I could see Bilibili potentially continuing their streak of overperforming at tournaments, especially because they were able to take the series against Gen.G at MSI, but I think Bilibili's playing worse than they were at MSI, and I think Gen.G is a better version of themselves. I think their bot lane, in particular, has been a lot better, and their top side has been better, and so I think Gen.G is going to be able to take that, although I'm not super sold that Bilibili upsetting would be, out of the realm of possibility. And then we've got NRG taking on Weibo Gaming. As much as I would love to sit here and tell you that NRG is going to win, I just can't. Weibo, I have predicted to win this one. I think that they are the better team, although, like I said, in that part of the quarterfinals analysis, I think this is a lot closer than people think it is. This is a dream draw for North American fans, for NRG fans, because NRG is a real shot and a real opportunity to be able to win this series. I think it's certainly not, completely wrong to say that Dokla or Palafox could take over this series and win 3 games against Weibo, a team that has been notoriously inconsistent. I'm just not going to predict it here. I'm going to be a lot more favorable towards NRG because it's already amazing they already got here, but I think Weibo should be better than them and they should be moving on. And then you've got JD Gaming versus KT Rolster. I love KT Rolster and I think they're incredibly slept on by most of the community, but JDG is just too good, man. They're the best team in the world for me right now. They're going to be moving on to that semifinals. I wish KT had an opportunity to potentially, play a team like Bilibili, because I really don't think that they are, definitely losing to a team like BLG. I certainly don't think that's crazy to say. I think they'd beat Weibo. I think, it'd be an interesting toss-up between them and LNG, right? I think those series are more interesting, obviously, to me, but JDG is just such a rough draw, and after the rough draws that they've had, not only over the course of this tournament, but all year long, quite frankly, this is appropriate for them to go out in the quarterfinals. And then LNG T1, in my opinion, the closest of the quarterfinal series. I could see either of these teams coming out on top. I think both are very talented, but I'm going to go with LNG in this one. They've impressed me so much at this tournament up until this point. Scout is for real. He's the best player in the world in terms of what he's performing like right now, and Gala is just phenomenal. As much as as I trust Faker and Guma and Zeus, who's been playing great, and Keria, I just think LNG is a little bit stronger at the current moment. But again, if T1 wins this, I'm not going to be surprised at all. And eagle-eyed viewers will note that that means that there are three LPL teams, I should say, in my semifinals and one LCK team. And the one LCK team I could see losing to an LPL team. There is a very real possibility with this bracket draw that we could see 4 LPL teams in the semifinals, and that would set the internet ablaze. That would just make China go absolutely nuts. It's definitely possible. I'm not going to predict it here, but it's certainly within reach. So, just keep that in mind. But jumping into my semifinals analysis, we start with Gen.G taking on Weibo Gaming. And this one I feel a lot more confident picking. This is Gen.G favored. I think Weibo is lucky to have drawn Energy. Like I said before, they're probably the 2 weakest teams in the quarterfinals. And, I think whoever ends up winning that series will probably get destroyed by whoever wins Gen.G and BLG. I think winning Gen.G and BLG, and that's essentially the semifinals for me. Like, I know Weibo could potentially upset some teams, and it's definitely possible for, a team like Gen.G to just be too slow and not react quick enough to a team like Weibo, but talent-wise, I think it's definitely within expectation to say that the winner of Gen.G BLG is moving on to World Finals, and I'm going to believe in that here. Gen.G is going to be able to take this series, and then a rematch of the LPL Summer Finals, JD Gaming versus LNG. I wish we weren't getting this in the semifinals. I wish we were getting Gen.G versus LNG instead. That's the series I really want to see, but just like many times before, it's just impossible to bet against JD Gaming. I love LNG, and I think this is a World's Finals caliber team, potentially a top 2 in the world if they would have drawn Gen.G. It's just not going to be with the way that the bracket ended up working out. They are on the side with JD Gaming, and that means they get knocked out in the semifinals, and my predictions here, JDG is just untouchable. And then we get to the finals, Gen.G, JD Gaming, Chovy versus Knight, a dream finals for me, a player or a person who loves those 2 players in particular, but Peanut versus Kanavi, probably the 2 best junglers in the world. You've got, Pays versus Ruler, maybe the 2 best performing AD carries in the world. Maybe not the 2 best AD carries, but 2 of the best, certainly, especially with, Ruler going up against his former organization in the World Finals. This is the dream matchup. This is what we really all want to see. And I've got JD Gaming going over. I've got the Golden Road being completed. I have never felt so confident in a League of Legends team as I do in the 2023 JD Gaming roster that they have put together. This is, for my money, the best League of Legends team ever created of all time, and I think they're going to prove it here. I have them going over Gen.G in the finals. Could this be Weibo? Maybe. Could this be Bilibili? Maybe. Could this be Energy? Probably not, but I guess it's possible, right? I just think JDG trumps them all. I think LNG is an interesting conversation to be had here, but my prediction for the winner of Worlds in 2023 is JD Gaming, to the surprise of no one. I have them taking down Gen.G in the finals. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you agree with my bracket prediction? Do you agree with my quarterfinals analysis? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content. And it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We've covered every single game of Worlds up until this point on this channel in depth, individually. And we're going to be doing that for the quarterfinals as well. They'll all get their own video every single day. So if you're excited for quarterfinals action, this is the place to be. If you enjoyed this video, I promise you're going to enjoy a lot of the rest of them too. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when the rest of those videos go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.